Hello, and welcome to Networking Field Day exclusive with VMware. My name is Tom Hollingsworth. I'm one of the event organizers for Tech Field Day, and I'm here with a wonderful group of delegates. We are at Dell Technologies World. We've heard some great announcements from VMware, especially around the networking area. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to bring together some thoughts and ideas about some of the things we've seen, maybe give some perspective and color for those of you who are watching at home that may not have had a chance to come here. I'd like to take just a quick moment for each of the panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll get going. Sonia?
Hi, I'm Sonia Cuff. I'm a consulting CIO and Microsoft MVP, and you can find me on Twitter at Cuff_S.
Hi, I'm Andrea Mauro. I'm a consultant in virtualization, storage, and infrastructure. My blog is vinfrastructure.it, and you can find me on Twitter at Andrea_Mauro.
Hello, I'm Luigi Danicos. I'm also a consultant for Blurt Media Group. You can find me on Twitter at NerdBlurt, and I blog for Blurt This.
Hi, my name is Jan Klaus. I'm a virtualization and storage consultant from the Netherlands. You can find me on Twitter at Jan Klaus.
I'm Jordan Martin. I'm a technical architect at Core BTS. I also am a co-founder and host on the Network Collective podcast. You can find me at my blog, jordanmartin.net, or at thenetworkcollective.com.
I'm Yvonne Sharp. I'm a network architect. You can find me on Twitter at Sharp Network. I am also co-founder and co-host of The Network Collective, so you can always find me at thenetworkcollective.com or on the blog at esharp.net.
I'm Denise Donahue. I'm a business architect with NetCraftsman. You can find me on Twitter at Lady Networker.
I'm Ed Horley. I'm the VP of Engineering for Groupware Technology. I blog at howfunky.com. I'm sort of typically known as the crazy IPv6 dude, and you can follow me on Twitter at ehorley.
All right, thank you all for joining us today. I greatly appreciate it. So we're going to get kicked off with probably what I consider to be one of the biggest announcements that we heard during Pat Gelsinger's keynote on Monday, which was the extension of the VeloCloud acquisition that came up last year. So for those of you who are longtime Tech Field Day and Networking Field Day fans, you're probably familiar with VeloCloud. They are an SD-WAN company that was acquired by VMware and integrated into the NSX business unit. And we saw that the VeloCloud product has now been rebranded to NSX SD-WAN by VeloCloud. This is something that a lot of people have been very interested to hear about. They want to see where this product is going to go and what it's going to allow VMware to do, especially when it comes to extending down into the branch, which is a place that a lot of the SD-WAN discussions are going now. I'm going to make Jordan kick this one off because Jordan's kind of our resident SD-WAN person, along with Yvonne, because of all the work that they've been doing in the SD-WAN space. So Jordan, what do you think about this when it comes to NSX SD-WAN?
I think the biggest challenge we've had as it relates to software-defined things, right? Fill in the blank, is that we've kind of we've taken it piece by piece. We started kind of in the data center, then we have the WAN, and now we're talking also about enterprise campus, and the idea is it's hard, as point solutions they work well, but to integrate them it was still left up to the practitioner to do it. And so this announcement to me is very interesting because of the completeness of vision, the idea of we're going to have one place to go to make these configurations. And I think it's where the market is going, but I think this is the fullest solution we've seen so far as it relates to being able to go in, my favorite term, single pane of glass, right? It's not really that, but the idea is you're going to be able to go in and configure your security groups, whatever your terminology you want to use for that, and be able to apply them across different types of devices. They're going to apply both in the data center and to the branch. And we've even seen it to some degree into the cloud as well with the Cloud Connect component there, which is, I think it's really interesting.
Well, I think for those of us who have been in and around SD-WAN for a while, I see this as a logical extension of what SD-WAN was and what it was doing. I think for a long time, some of us have been talking about how great would it be if we could take the segmentation that's part of SD-WAN and the traffic engineering that's part of SD-WAN and all that policy and unify that with what we're doing in the data center. So very much what Jordan said about taking that policy and being able to define it in one place and then share that across your entire network. So you have a big fabric that is stable and also centrally controlled is really exciting, because we have been, if we've wanted to do software-defined technologies, there's been a lot of manual stitching that has had to happen, which requires a high level of competency, but you also have all these interaction services that you have to manage. So I think having a unified solution to provide all that functionality is really exciting.
Awesome. Now I want to toss it over here to the cloud side of the table. What are your...
Hey, some of us over here are cloudy too. Go ahead.
What are some of your thoughts around this announcement? What it really excited you when we heard about all the things that VMware is trying to do with SD-WAN through VeloCloud now?
I just want to echo off what Yvonne said, and I think being platform agnostic is the new black, right? And so finally the vendors are coming around to the fact that they're not going to sell a customer 100% on their solutions all the time, and that's all they're going to use. And it's reflected in what we've seen in Dell Tech World, to walk out on the showcase floor and see brands which traditionally may have been quite strong competitors are now coming together, and that can only help us with seeing that increase in the tool sets that we're now getting to work with that are a lot more unified. So it really is like the vendors are taking note, the industry's kind of growing up and giving us the capabilities that we need to manage multi-platform.
It is a lot to digest, especially if you're not familiar with the way that SD-WAN is doing things. But the idea behind it, I'm assuming, is that we want to try to make the jobs a lot easier for the folks who run the data centers. I mean, we've spent years busting all of those silos apart, storage and compute, and now hopefully we can introduce networking as just another component.
Yeah, and so I can see how this can really help with disaster recovery into the cloud as well. So to be able to software define and move those networks around when I've got an outage and I need to reroute workloads into cloud because I'm having issues on-prem, that disaster recovery into the cloud scenario is just strengthened too.
I saw this as the first key initiative of getting policy enforcement done correctly, which is really what this is all about. I mean, networking is interesting within the networking state, but the reality is that policy enforcement that's universal across public cloud, any hybrid cloud configuration, anything else that you want to be able to deliver, the natural extension is having something like an SD-WAN product portfolio that has policy enforcement that can be carried all the way through. So from the end user, edge compute, into your data center, turn around back out to public cloud. That's really where the strength, and I assume the roadmap and direction is really going for VMware and for other competitors in the industry. And where the industry is going overall, I think if you look at what's happening within the open source community about what they're trying to build around Kubernetes, about what we're trying to build with Istio, all those sorts of things are a natural evolution of going that way.
I think this is really where complexity gets driven into the network, is when we try to do the translation between systems to enforce the same policy but through different languages. Right, so when we come out of your SD-WAN provider and try to talk to your data center fabric, and those two things aren't talking to each other, there's a lot of complexity in mapping those two things together that every customer has to do for themselves. And so for this is a simplification of that, and like you said, the proper first step towards a proper implementation of policy that's unified across different networking types.
So I'll jump out on a limb here and say this, because you guys are talking a lot about policy, and a lot of the other places that we hear policy is through intent-based networking. Do you see this as a huge facilitator for that kind of communication now that you can basically apply your policy from cloud to branch and back again?
Well, so policy extension, the natural interface is an API. So for anything that's intent-based, it's going to address it through an API. So what I think is being built today, what's sort of unique about what's being built today and what VMware is providing is, hey, you can access us through an API. Whatever policy enforcement engine you want to utilize to be able to place policy within us, we're giving you a uniform framework. A northbound API would be able to talk to us in a uniform way. So regardless of the infrastructure choices that you make along the way in your journey, you can still have something that allows you to do that, or you can use our framework natively to be able to do the same thing, and we'll extend it out the same way. That's sort of how I see the game being played.
We get when we start virtualizing the network, and we've seen this with virtualization of infrastructure, is that we're able to build systems that are that are much more resilient, because right now, especially in the network, we still have network environments that are one big blast radius. We have huge failure domains. And so as you're able to virtualize the network, to create virtual networks and tie those to particular services and have that run in an overlay over a very simple layer 3 IP routed network, you're going to increase not only your reliability and your resiliency, but your ability to make changes. Because right now, in many enterprises, we are so afraid of breaking stuff, we don't touch it. And the fact that we wait forever to touch it actually makes the infrastructure less reliable, because we don't patch it, because we need to make a change that we know that we know needs to be made, but we're afraid to make it, and there's all these approval processes to get that done. So I think as we virtualize the network, create simple underlays, and move a lot of that complexity into software, into the overlay, it's going to make us more agile, to use another one of those words that we're all familiar and that's a favorite. But it's also actually going to make our infrastructure work better, which keeps us from being up at night, which is a great thing.
Yeah, I agree. I like sleeping. All right. So let's move on to another topic, which is kind of interesting. There was an announcement that VMware is now supporting Azure on top of AWS as a public cloud destination. We got a really interesting demo of moving some virtual machines back and forth through Hybrid Connect, which is another piece that a lot of people are concentrating on, the ability to move workloads into the cloud securely, effectively, and it doesn't matter where the destination is going to be. You can even use Hybrid Connect to move between AWS and Azure, which, that may not be the easiest thing in the world to do already. But I mean, what do we think about this? I mean, there seems to be a huge push inside of VMware to say it doesn't matter where your workloads live, we can get you where you want to go.
I would have to say, Tom, that that's just part of business. You have to go and do things where your customers are. Not all your customers are going to be on AWS. They're going to have customers that switch from AWS to Azure, Azure to AWS, and vice versa, or then ultimately maybe go to Google or other providers as well. And you have to look at where you have your customers going, and you need to be able to support them as they go through that journey as well.
Yeah, I'll definitely second that. We see a lot of customers moving to Azure, not specifically only AWS, but so Azure support is really important.
So let me pose this question to you. Do you see a lot of customers moving from on-premises workloads to one cloud or the other, or do you see a lot of customers that tend to move back and forth between clouds?
Both. Both, because some maybe start several years ago and to moving to a public cloud, and now maybe are trying to go back, or somebody is in a public cloud is moving to another public cloud just because maybe for the cost or for other reason. But the main important thing, I think, is that you need some kind of mobility, some kind of abstraction. The network part is a really important part to ensure not only the mobility, but also the hybrid cloud, because unless you cannot communicate in an easy way, in a secure way across the cloud. For the real mobility, of course, this is another aspect, because the demo that we've seen was only across a vSphere environment to another vSphere environment running on AWS. Also, Microsoft has built its own vSphere environment inside Azure, so this can be possible. But it opens the possibility for third-party product to build also the workload conversion. So if you have a network layer and with similar or the same policy, is a good part for start.
There's also a really strong story here in government in Australia. Azure has opened up regions that have got Australian Signals Directorate compliance for, secure classified documents. And so, that's a very strategic play to be able to support Azure in our region, because it now opens this up for government for those specific use cases.
Well, and the cloud is beginning to grow up. And one of the challenges with cloud is that each cloud environment is its own new monolith. And they have their own APIs, they have their own way of doing things, their own kinds of virtual networks. And what I see emerging with what VMware is doing is trying to create, again, an overarching unifying policy to help manage those environments. Because we in a lot of organizations, not all of them, but in a lot of organizations, they're still in that day one kind of relationship with the cloud. How do we use it? How do we deploy applications into it? How does it work for our business? There aren't huge sets of organizational processes around those services yet. And we are going to need those because it's not always going to be the new cool kids building out infrastructure in the cloud. It's just going to be the way the infrastructure works. And so we need a way to unify policy across those environments. And I think this is exciting.
That makes sense. Now, do you think that VMware's adoption of AWS first and now Azure kind of helps organizations make safe bets on the cloud, knowing that they can move their workloads in and out and not worrying about I was having a conversation with a guy on the airplane out here about how he doesn't trust the cloud because everyone he's ever seen or thought about using went out of business. And my first thought was, I don't think Amazon's going out of business anytime soon. But do you think that that's going to drive people back to that level of comfort just because we feel like we can get our stuff back just in case?
I mean, I feel like there's always a comfort level, especially in enterprises, with established vendors. But I think it was Jordan earlier who mentioned a completeness of vision. And I think that is the story that's most compelling from VMware, because as I look at the space other than AWS and Azure and Google, your big public cloud providers, I don't see anybody else who has this kind of a vision for the cloud.
Well, companies have a vision. Making it work is a whole other thing. Whenever you ask other vendors, so when are you going to get the end-to-end segmentation, the end-to-end policies, it's like, yeah, we're working on pulling those two things together.
I have a slide, but I don't have a roadmap or a delivery date.
Right.
I was in that meeting last week, right? So, I think we see true execution with what VMware is doing.
I think that's critical. I think that's critical to enterprises. Most enterprises are not big companies that have whole dev shops and everything. They look at this and it's so complex. And as you said, this is reducing that complexity. This is being able to do the same thing end to end with a consistent, not necessarily a single pane of glass, but a consistent pane of glass, which was a phrase I heard last night and liked and will steal. So if you say your phrase, I'm sorry. And that's what enterprises are looking for. Being able to know it doesn't matter which cloud I go to, it doesn't matter that I need, that my policy is here for my data center and my end user is over there. They're going to be consistent across everything, no matter which one of my data centers, virtual or physical, they go to.
Yeah, I was going to say it makes sense that they started with Amazon because Amazon was the cloud leader. And then you go to the second biggest cloud leader, which would be Azure. I think what was more telling for me is that they're going and announcing partnerships with Azure, but I don't see them making announcements for what they're doing with their own cloud service with VirtuStream. So it's like, well, what's their play in that? So are they only focused on these two big guys? And what about their own cloud company in which they tout within, well, as far as Dell, as far as like a partnership and so forth?
That's actually a good point because the VirtuStream has spent a lot of time. They've tried to make that look like a credible.
They run the vSphere stack natively, so that's actually already done. So you don't need to build that for something that's already done in that particular space. I think what's unique about what the positioning set with Azure is that from a sales motion basis, AWS and public cloud was probably traditionally not the first set of customers that were overlapped from a Venn diagram basis of what matched with VMware's core set of business partners and customers. But if you take Microsoft as a company, there's a great deal of overlap from a customer base. And so if you have enterprise agreements and you have a lot of other things that are in play, you probably have the same customer base. And so the market motion probably makes the most sense, given the leadership position that AWS was in, to be able to say, let's work with the first, foremost, largest public cloud provider because it addresses some growth areas of net new market. That makes a lot of sense. They have a very large extended ecosystem that we can sell into. And then Azure is a large overlap, and we can do a go-to-market motion that looks a little different, but also plays very well in terms of what we're providing them today. So I think if you think of it fairly from a business basis, it's also the set of partners that you have in the ecosystem look different. And so I think if you look at the set of partners that you need for AWS and how many do VMware well today, that was a smaller Venn diagram. I was part of the, Groupware was part of the sort of the initial group of individuals to do the VMware Cloud on AWS, and there were a very small number, and there was a reason why for that particular reason. I think if you look at Microsoft, you're going to have a much bigger base of partners that are going to be able to enable that ecosystem, and so I think it makes natural sense to be able to do that there. And that's just sort of purely a partner view of that play, but to me that's how it sort of plays out.
All right. Well, let's move on to our third topic, which is a little more focused on network function virtualization. We've had some great discussion from a couple of VMware's partners, service provider partners in Telstra and Swisscom, where they're talking about doing NFV on premises with NSX. Basically kind of offering service provider-like functionality, but not having to do it in the service provider's network. And they're talking a lot about how this is going to enable things like digital transformation, how it's going to give customers a lot more flexibility in the way that they do things. NFV's a big thing that we've heard a lot about. NFV, SDN have been around forever, but I feel like SDN kind of got a lot more play initially because of the things that it enabled. And NFV is kind of growing up a little bit into finding a niche where it needs to fit. So, what do you think about the announcements about the NFV capabilities that you're getting? For you folks that are going to be using and consuming these services, does it matter to you where those services live? Would you like it to be a little closer to home?
I think that you should focus on the service, not really where it is implemented. So have a service in a software can bring more opportunity to automate, to have an abstraction, to have an independency on the hardware layer. But usually you just need the service. So this is the most important part. If we look at the cloud model, you need something to consume. It doesn't matter if it's in hardware or software or what else. About the NFV, for example, a lot of telco are using this for 5G because otherwise it is really difficult to implement in hardware the solution. In this case, you need a specific requirement for performance or so on, and you need to move the entire process to something that is more powerful, like servers, instead of a typical specific hardware that cannot be flexible to implement a new kind of services. So,
well, I think for the service providers this is really important. It's probably more falls in the line of traditional SD-WAN of trying to push service components to where they belong within a network flow. So solving that particular problem, especially around bifurcating and being able to provide services at edge that have high performance need requirements that may be utilizing services locally and data points that are local. You can do something very interesting and even be disconnected from public clouds. So maybe the data telemetry side doesn't have to report all the way back because the interesting information isn't required. But you can do service insertion where you need it. You can provide a set of data tier services like, very simple stuff, load balancing services, things that we probably will push more in the app stack. But the reality is things like authentication services, things like regular components that need to be maintained and have high availability, that might make a lot more sense closer to the edge for the end user than it is to backhaul all of that. And I think being able to do that explicitly within the platform and not necessarily care about what service fabric you have underneath it becomes really important. And being able to do that with VeloCloud components and stitch that together and have an edge-based reality for that, as close to the end user as possible to deliver that service, and then be able to say, hey, I can leverage something all the way back in the data center and stitch and flow that together And depending on what that service application flow actually is it serviced as locally at the edge, or does it have to come all the way back, get serviced and come back? That doesn't have to be something that we as network operators have to figure out. That's something that the application with policy enforcement is figuring out on its own. And I think that's the unique value proposition of what is provided there, because as we start dealing with bigger autonomous systems, pumping more data out, we don't want to figure this stuff out on the fly. We want to automate a system to sort of figure this out at scale over time.
It's just impossible to build a network that's dynamic enough to do that runs. You know, I mean, you just can't maintain all that.
Well, and you need to account. Yeah, exactly. You need to account for bandwidth, sizing and placement of bandwidth. 5G is going to be incredibly important in doing that and getting that edge service as close to the end user. And then how you deliver that 5G service back. The fact that you want to be multi-tenant. The fact that, I mean, there's all sorts of things, right? In terms of autonomous vehicles talking to each other, and can you push certain components for service insertion all the way out to them? That becomes really interesting and a use case that we probably haven't touched yet, but definitely I could see how it would make a lot of sense because you don't necessarily want certain systems, even within autonomous vehicles, necessarily talking to each other. You know, hacking your cigarette lighter to get in and take over the entire car is not the greatest way to go about stuff. So I think those are the things that are going to be really interesting about how you can actually divide up and build explicit service insertion points with NFV that solve that problem.
And in terms of services, I think that opens up another part of the market as well, because we're redefining what it means to be a small or medium business. And we're seeing SMBs now that have multiple branches and they have requirements for high availability because they are dealing in very significant amounts of financial transactions. If they're unable to get their work done, it doesn't necessarily mean that they've got thousands of people as headcount, and so they're less likely to have a dedicated expert network team. So with tools like this, if the telcos want to step in or any other providers want to step in and go, look, we can manage this stuff for you as a service, we can be your network team as a service, for want of a better term, it's going to open up new markets for them, for these smaller businesses that are small in terms of headcount, but they still very much have a need and the budget for this kind of thing.
I think to extend Ed's point, like I couldn't agree more. I don't think NFV enables the fact that I don't care where the service lives. I think it enables me to let the service live where it needs to be. And so the idea being that I can be more specific and more strategic about where I place a service because it's not so tied to a specific piece of hardware. If I need to do a firewall rule and I want to put it at the edge, I don't need some super high performance piece of equipment to do that because I'm going to handle a whole lot less traffic all at the same time. And so it's not, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that it's not so much that I don't care where it lives. It is that by virtualizing it, I can put it exactly where I need it to be. And I care more about where it lives, and it gives me more flexibility in that.
So we're wrapping up here at Dell Technologies World. We've seen a lot of great things that have come out of VMware, but Tech Field Day is also about the future. What are we going to see? And specifically, I want to get some ideas from you folks, since we have some ears in the room. What would you like to see VMware NSX work on for the next year, for the next 18 months? Where do you think this technology should go?
Well, I would say just more unified policy. The more we can unify policy, the easier it's going to be to manage and the more stable our systems can be. So really that's the big thing. And also deeper integration into the cloud, deeper abilities to control workloads, to integrate platform as a service and to be able to execute policy around that, to help provide some guidance around security models, especially in the cloud. How do we secure that infrastructure? How do we connect the security model in the cloud? How do we work with our existing compliance and regulatory requirements? And how do we map those things together so that those that are used to doing, especially security, according to a model that doesn't fit this new technology, how do we get from the old way of doing it to the new way of doing it, to help provide roadmaps, to provide comfort in the enterprise for how to do that? Because so often we're in conversations that are like, well, we have to have IPS. Well, why do we have to have that? Well, because we're legally required to by our regulations. And that's not exactly true, but that is what people believe. And so to help provide some leadership and guidance around those compliance conversations and regulatory conversations.
I would agree with Yvonne on that, with the compliance aspect of it. Also, she stole the show when I was thinking about, one of the questions it's okay. One of the questions I had for Nick, the presenter, which I didn't get to ask, was how much they have integrated into the VMware Cloud and AWS offering with the NSX and the VCN stuff. So to see where they go deeper within the cloud integrations would definitely be welcome to know.
Well, you have to be on 6.5, and you have to run NSX in order to be able to do VMware Cloud on AWS.
Well, if you're in VMware Cloud, from what I understand, it's automatically upgraded to the latest version of vSphere.
Ecosystem, expanding the ecosystem of where you're able to push policies to also. This is not just servers in the data center. And not just servers that, not just end users at the end user spot. I know they, in the talk today, in the briefing today, they mentioned pushing some of VMware's ecosystem partners into the VeloSpan offering. So the more they can expand, more you can expand the ecosystem for NSX and for a VeloSpan, that would be helpful.
And I want to add one more thing. Really, education, especially to folks who've done it the old way forever. Our network engineers are really struggling to wrap their brains around the new world. I think the more we can educate and enable and build community and help people understand the value, it's another big thing we need. I'm done now.
I'm going to take the next step and echo what we're starting to see with the server infrastructure, how they're introducing machine learning and artificial intelligence to help manage those. I'd like to see machine learning and AI in this context where not just we're sitting here and we're creating those security policies, but we're actually getting recommendations on what we should be changing or how we should be setting up those policies or information about what's happening on those networks, and the machines actually helping us, configure them better.
I'd say the future is really, especially around the integration that they've already done with Kubernetes, the future is Istio and doing service insertion and interesting plays with what's going to happen there, especially around the universality of policy enforcement. That's one of the main things they're working on. I think the traffic management, the scale up, all the telemetry data, everything else that you're interested in from a big scale, and having that be under the CNCF and being an open format and everyone being able to contribute is a huge win for all of us, because it means that ecosystem of partners is not something built as an isolated one set solution. It's really something that will work uniformly sort of across the board, or at least that's a hope that we all sort of pray for, that we get something better in that way. Since we've lost all our standard parties and no one wants to go to the IETF anymore, it seems like we just work this out in open source code, right? So hopefully that's the form that's going to be the sort of coin of the realm for people to move ahead in this area.
All right, well, I think we'll go ahead and wrap it there. This is a great discussion. I want to thank all the panelists for their time and their thoughts. This is an exciting time in networking and cloud. We're starting to see a lot of movement, kind of making things better for all of us that have spent so many years in the trenches trying to make all this stuff work. I guess we all get to get new jobs, truck driving maybe, something like that.
No. We're going to get better jobs, doing things better than what we've been doing.
There you go. Yeah, so for those of you who want a better job, keep watching Tech Field Day, because we will keep bringing you great content like this and keep educating you about all the things that you should be aware of. For the panelists, for the guests in the room, for Stephen Foskett and all of our friends out there online, thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for more great stuff from Tech Field Day.